Good morning, George Hepworth, Grover Park Consulting. Let's build Mike's mobile library. Today we're going to take a look at variations in variables. More specifically, we're going to look at whether a variable has been set to the value of a record in a lookup table itself or to the value of a lookup field containing that record in a different table. Does it matter? Can it be done? Let's find out. Here we are back in the development area of my 365 account where we've opened the development copy of Mike's mobile library, and we'll continue to make some changes. Just to refresh where we've been and where we are now, we started with the full production version of the application, and we're making changes to it as we bring it across to our development version, where the intention will be over time to make additions and improvements and changes as required. I have a confession to make. I've actually been doing that during the process of setting it up. So what you're going to see today is slightly different in some ways from what we saw in a couple of videos back. That actually shouldn't make any difference to what we're going to discuss today, but I did want to alert you that if you see something different from what you expected from a prior video, that's why. Let's start by looking at the variables. As I mentioned in a prior video, we can use the View option on the menu to see the current values of all the variables in our application. The ones that we're mostly concerned about today are going to be those that refer to the lookup fields in our publications table. Let's scroll down through our list here and find the variables we set for the 4 lookup fields in our table. I believe varCondition is the one that we used in our previous session, so let's look at that. It's set in a number of different places, 5 altogether. In the onStart, we initialize it. When you click on the icon to add a new publication from the publications screen, that sets the value of varCondition. When you click on the icon to edit an existing publication in the publication screen, that also sets the varCondition. It will set it differently depending on which of these two places is setting it, and I'll show you that in more detail when we get to the actual icons, because it's too hard to read this tiny text here on the screen. It's set in 2 other places on the Edit Publication screen. Once when we select the drop-down for media condition, and once when we change the drop-down for media condition. So let's go back and look now at where this is used. Let's start with the Add icon. There's our default condition. This is different from what I've shown you in previous sessions, and when I said that I had been implementing changes as I'm setting up the development. This is one of the things that I was talking about. Just kind of as an aside, as I dug deeper and deeper and became better informed about how this all works, I got a little more sophisticated in the way I was setting these. And this, I think, is the optimal way to do it, at least for what I understand at this point. It could change again as I learn more, but I always like to think that we continue to learn as we go. So we're going to set the varCondition for the default on new publications to media condition ID equals 2, which is excellent. The way we do that is we have to filter the lookup table for media condition to those records which contain media condition ID equal 2. That's not enough to make it available. We have to also tell it we need only one record returned by this filter, and that record is the first. In other words, my understanding, and this is why I say my understanding could get more sophisticated as we go, but my understanding at this point is the filter basically returns a table of values, all of which have the media condition ID equals 2, it has no way of saying, well, there's only one record in this table. So we add to that, show me only the first, and that brings it down to a single record. And that's the value we assign to varCondition. At this point, varCondition contains a record from the lookup media condition table. I said that slowly because I want to emphasize it. varCondition contains one record from the lookup table for media condition. Let's look, and the others are set the same way. If we look at the edit option, it's set a little differently. It's set to the value of the media condition ID for our selected publication. So this will be a record again, but it will not be a record from the lookup table. It'll be a record representing the currently selected record in our gallery or in the variable var publication. Let's see what this has in it. It's not yet defined because we haven't selected anything. We're looking at this for the first time, so we haven't selected it. So as you can see, depending on which of these two avenues or methods we follow to get to the edit screen, we're either going to have a record in the condition variable and the other three variables as well. We're going to have a record in the condition variable that represents the default from the lookup table for media condition, or we're going to have a record that represents a value in the publications table. That has impact on how they show up. So let's actually run the application and show you what I mean. If I select the Add New Publication option, it brings me to this edit screen. And in the process, set the value for varCondition and again, the other three records. So if we scroll down here to our patch command that adds a new record, and then we find media condition, and we double click on that, it shows me that the record I'm looking at is from the table of lookups for media condition. Excellent, sort order, and ID. Now this ID is crucial because that's what we're actually going to store. Notice that it is the fully capitalized version because that is the primary key value from that field, or from that record in that table. The value we're going to assign is 2. It's a text value. So we're going to go to the ID of 2 and assign it the value of 2. And the same would be true of the other three lookups. While this is fresh in our mind, let's go back. We'll run this, go back, and this time we'll select a record to edit. When we get here this time, media condition is good rather than excellent. So let's take a look at what our variables are set to now. We came to this screen from the edit option, so let's see what impact that has on our variables. We'll close this, come in, select the save icon, and we'll look at, this time we will look at the edit branch of our conditional. Scroll down and find media condition. I have made a modification, and I'll explain why I made this modification between the add and the edit and then we'll go back and modify the add version as well. We set varCondition from the existing record selected in the gallery. If I show you what that looks like, it turns out that it is quite different from the default that we pulled in from the lookup table. It has an ID, just the same as the first look in add, but it is the uppercase, lowercase version of ID and the value. What that tells me is two things. Number one, as I said in the introduction to this session, when we set variables in different ways, they can end up with different kinds of values. We're dealing with records, not just numbers. In the access world, this would be value 5, and that's all there would be to it. varCondition ID would be 5, and that's the only thing we would really need to worry about in a properly defined relationship between those tables. In the SharePoint world, it's not that simple. We not only have two different paths to set this variable, but by going down the different paths, we end up with slightly different names. Here, it's the uppercase, lowercase. In the first path we just saw, it was the all uppercase. PowerApps is case sensitive. That means I can't just, as I would in the access world, use capital I, capital D, or lowercase I, lowercase d, or in this case, capital case I, lowercase d. They have to match exactly in the value and in the cases. So, to account for that, I added a little conditional to check what I've got, depending on where I came from, and make sure that I pick a value that has something in it. I said, if varCondition.id is blank, there's nothing in it, or it raises an error, we'll use varCondition uppercase, lowercase id. That means that whether it came from add with the uppercase, or from edit with the uppercase, lowercase, I'm going to have a valid value in that ID field. And the same is true for its text value. And as you look at the other variables from the lookup fields, you can see I did the same thing with them. In other words, in order to handle the case, whether I came from the add option or the edit option, I'm going to get valid values. So let's close this, and I'm going to run it again with another slight modification. I'll be right back. Okay, I've done two things. First, I restarted the application to reinitialize my variables, condition and media type and so on. And I also added 4 labels to the screen in which I can display, as we work back and forth through this process, the actual values that those variables have at any given point. Notice that there are 2 versions. There's the varCondition dot capital I, capital D, and varCondition dot capital I, lowercase d. And they show up here in these 4 fields or labels on the screen. Right now, neither version has a value. So you can see that the asterisks are together with nothing in between. That's because it's been initialized to blank. If I run this now, and I will start to play the application, go back to the beginning, step in publications, and now I will click the add icon, which will pull the variables from the lookup tables. And as we get here, we see now that the version of the variable which uses the dot capital I capital D property is now populated with the defaults that we want to use from our look table. As you see there, and the same is true for the other three. If I go back and edit, this time we're setting varCondition differently. We set it to reflect the selected item in that gallery. And now this version does not have a value. This version with the capital I lowercase d does have a value, reflecting the currently selected values for these four fields, these four lookup fields. If I attempt to save, then we can look at how the save works again. We looked at that just a minute ago. Let's review that again. And we're edit in the edit version, so let's just scroll down here. Well, that's the media type. Let's scroll down and find the media condition. That's the one we're working with. If the ID option of our varCondition is blank, or there's nothing there, or it raises an error, we're going to use this one when we update the value of that field in our table. And this is the publications table. If we came from the other path through the add option, this would be not blank. It would have a value, and we would simply select that value, which is the default. This way, I know that no matter how I come into the edit screen, whether I come from the add option or the edit option, I will always have a valid value to store with this record. This resolves kind of an intermittent problem that I was having as I was preparing for this demo. I kept seeing sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't, and after putting these controls onto the screen where I could actually see what was happening, then it became clear to me that not only is it a difference in the two options, whether it's a lookup field or a lookup field or a value from the lookup table, either way I'm going to get a valid value by looking at both. So with that, I believe we have covered our territory on saving updates to existing records, saving new records, and the issue of working correctly with lookup fields in SharePoint lists. Before I wrap it up, I would like to address another topic in a very cursory way. I'm not going to go into it in depth. And that is why I elected to use the patch command. Originally, the decision to use the patch command as opposed to the more of a out-of-the-box experience, which is also possible. The main reason I chose the patch command was really so that I could handle these four lookup fields better. In the process, I did avoid some of the problems with submit form, which is the default option. But I went down, when I now look back and say, well, I was in that rabbit hole quite a while trying to figure out how to make this work effectively. I went through the option of using the OData connector, which turned out not to be necessary, thankfully. And then this issue with, depending on how you set that variable, you get different results. And I ended up with a place where I think it's now effectively covering all of my bases and I can move forward. Once again, I hope you have enjoyed or learned something from your participation in this experiment that I'm conducting. I hope that you will find it useful enough to subscribe to my channel, hit the like button, And also post any comments or feedback that you have on this video and any others in the comment section. In particular, as noted, I want to know if you have any insight into any of these issues, why I have to use first to pull a default value out of the lookup table, and whether my interpretation of what's really going on here is in fact accurate. Thanks, and I'll see you next time.